A modern rule of etiquette is to never discuss religion or politics. Well, in 1st century Judea, these topics were on everyone's lips, leading to awkward dinner conversations and an even more awkward standing with the Roman world, since these conversations would question Judea's place in the Roman Empire and the Messiah's role in the liberation of their country. This video will highlight the competing factions of ancient Judea around the time of Jesus of Nazareth, and these debates over theology, social issues, and political autonomy would fuel the fires of rebellion, leading to the Great Jewish War, which is the topic of our main series. So let's jump into it with our first group, the Sanhedrin. During Second Temple Judaism, the Sanhedrin was an ancient Jewish court system made up of sages deliberating over various religious, political, civil, and criminal matters. The term itself comes from the Greek word for council, called Sanhedrion. There were numerous local Sanhedrins sprinkled all throughout Judea, but the most important one was found in Jerusalem, referred to as the Great Sanhedrin, or even simply the Sanhedrin. Now, think of this body as the ancient Jewish Supreme Court, with not only judicial authority, but legislative as well, having both the power to make and interpret the laws. This body was the final authority on Jewish law, and it contained 71 members. This authority also extended towards rituals, in that the Sanhedrin oversaw religious observances like Yom Kippur or the Day of Atonement. Both Josephus, a prominent 1st century Jewish historian, and New Testament texts suggest that the Sanhedrin of Jerusalem was headed by the high priest, while the Talmud does not mention a high priest being in charge at all. A number of these sages that made up this body belonged to separate factions, groups such as the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, let's talk about these groups individually. First, the Pharisees. They and the Sadducees get a bad rap in the Christian scriptures. But who are they exactly? And what was their role in Jewish society? The word Pharisee itself comes from the Hebrew Purushim, meaning separatist. This term could mean that they separated themselves from the carnal world and focused on piety and spiritual matters, or that they wanted to be set apart from those who did not interpret the Jewish religious laws correctly. Along with the Torah, the written law, they likewise held in similar esteem the oral law that Moses received from Yahweh on Sinai's height. This oral law was written down many centuries after the time of Moses, becoming what is known as the Talmud. The Pharisees kept their practices after the destruction of the Second Temple, admonishing the Jewish people to keep to individual prayer and attendance in synagogues. They were thus the spiritual pioneers and forefathers of Rabbinic Judaism, in essence, modern Judaism. The Pharisees also believed in several supernatural concepts that distinguished them from their Sadducee counterparts, such as an afterlife where souls are judged based on their deeds on earth, the active participation of angels, and a bodily resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees, on their part, did not believe in any of these supernatural phenomena, nor did they take the oral law as authoritative, revering the written law only. As the Pharisees were more of the blue-collar type, the Sadducees comprised of the elites of Judean society. And, as the Pharisees were opposed to Hellenistic and Roman influence and authority, the Sadducees were more accepting. This priestly caste disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple, with their counterparts, the Pharisees, surviving them. In 1947, inside a cave near the Dead Sea, a shepherd stumbled across a collection of scrolls encased in jars. These Dead Sea Scrolls, as they have become known, were over 2,000 years old. A number of their parchment pieces evidence some of the oldest copies of the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Old Testament, while others contain information on a certain sect within Second Temple Judaism, namely the Essenes. The Essenes were a group of Jewish ascetics, meaning that these were people who separated themselves from society entirely and inhabited remote regions of the desert to live a holy life of contemplation on the divine. They were sort of like monks before monks were a thing in this part of the world, living celibate lifestyles and observing strict dietary laws. They believed that the Judaism in their day had been corrupted, especially through the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So they decided to divorce themselves from society, from the temple, and from their own people. The Essenes heavily emphasized ritual washing and purification in preparation for the end times, which leads some scholars to believe that they were the forerunners of the Christian practice of baptism, and that even John the Baptist might have been one of their number. The Essenes are also thought to be related to the group of isolated religious devotees that housed the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of Qumran. Now onto another group living an extreme lifestyle, the Zealots. The Zealots were an underground movement of Jewish revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow Roman authority in Judea. They believed in the coming of a Messiah who would lead them to victory over their foes, liberate Judea, and usher in a utopia. A subgroup of the Zealots were the Sicarii, also known as daggermen or assassins. These extremists used terror and assassinations to make Gentile rule in the area unbearable. They were uncompromising in their zealotry, eliminating both Romans and Roman sympathizers. Their actions in response to Roman mismanagement and oppressive governance sparked the Great Jewish Revolt of the year 66. After the fall of Jerusalem, a number of these zealots retreated to the fortress of Masada, where they withheld the Roman onslaught until, finding that all hope was lost, they committed mass suicide. Scholars say that one of Jesus' disciples, named Simon the Zealot, might have belonged to this sect as well. Speaking of Jesus, lastly, we have the Christians. Nicknamed the Way, Galileans, Little Christ, aka Christians, these were the followers of Jesus of Nazareth, whom they believed was the Messiah, Mashiach, Christ, all of which mean the Anointed One. Jesus and his early followers were Jews who practiced and observed Jewish traditions. Although they were strict monotheists, believing in the one God of Israel, his followers also believed Jesus was divine. However, the distinction between a practitioner of Judaism versus Christianity became more defined after the ministry of Paul the Apostle, who carried his interpretation of the Christian message to non-Jews. Likewise, the destruction of the Second Temple loosened Christian ties to its Jewish heritage. And there you have it, a list of the various sects and movements operating in 1st century Judea that made the land a tinderbox ready to ignite. Stay tuned for more content.